Ethan Cole, Lena Brooks, and Marcus Hale, three lives destined to collide in a web of betrayal, secrets, and deadly revenge, set the stage for a shocking story that exposes how trust can be weaponized, loyalty can be shattered, and justice can be delivered from the unlikeliest of places. Please subscribe for daily new update of crime story and watch till end. The prison stood far from the nearest town, surrounded by dry land and long, empty roads. From the outside, it looked like a place built to be forgotten. Tall concrete walls, rusted watchtowers, and heavy steel gates made sure nothing escaped, not people, not sounds, and not secrets. Inside, every day felt the same. The air was thick with silence, broken only by footsteps, keys, and distant alarms. Time did not move forward here. It dragged itself slowly, leaving men trapped not just by walls, but by their own thoughts. Among the thousands of inmates was Ethan Cole, a man in his early 40s with tired eyes and a calm face. He had been inside for many years, serving a long sentence for financial crimes connected to corporate fraud. Unlike others, he was not loud or aggressive. He followed rules, kept his head down, and spoke only when necessary. Guards barely noticed him, and other inmates saw him as someone who simply existed, nothing more. That invisibility became his shield. Ethan spent most of his time observing. He watched how power worked inside the prison. He noticed which guards abused authority and which inmates controlled entire cell blocks without touching violence. He understood that this place had its own system, one built on fear, silence, and favors. The prison claimed to be about justice, but Ethan quickly learned it was about control. At the top of that control stood Warden Marcus Hale. His name alone carried weight. To the outside world, he was known as a disciplined leader who had reduced violence and maintained order. News articles praised his management skills. Inside the prison, the story was different. Inmates feared him, and guards obeyed him without question. His decisions were final, and questioning them came with consequences. Ethan had seen men disappear into isolation for minor reasons. He had seen medical requests delayed, privileges removed, and files altered. All of it happened quietly. No shouting, no public punishment, just silence. That silence was the warden's strongest weapon. Despite everything, Ethan still believed the system had limits. He believed there were rules that even powerful people could not break. He trusted official paperwork, medical programs, and rehabilitation efforts. That belief gave him a small sense of safety in an unsafe place. He did not yet know that his name already existed in files marked with dates and decisions he had never seen. He did not know that choices made in offices far above his cell had already changed his future. The prison looked the same every day, but beneath its concrete floors, something dark was already moving. Ethan woke up each morning thinking survival meant obedience. He believed staying invisible would protect him, but the prison was not done with him yet. And the secret hidden inside those walls would soon turn his quiet life into a story that would shock the entire nation. The medical program inside the prison was introduced as a step toward reform. Officials claimed it would help inmates understand their health and prepare them for life after release. For many prisoners, it meant nothing more than extra paperwork and long waiting lines. For Ethan Cole, it became the first moment in years when he felt treated like a human being instead of a number. Because of his education and calm behavior, he was assigned to assist with organizing non-confidential health records under supervision. The task was simple, but it gave him limited access to an area most inmates never saw. That was where he first noticed Lena Brooks. She was not a guard or a doctor, but a volunteer working with a non-profit organization focused on inmate rehabilitation and health awareness. She moved through the medical wing with quiet confidence, carrying files and clipboards, always focused on her work. Unlike most people who entered the prison, she did not look uncomfortable or afraid. Her presence brought a different energy to a place built on tension. Lena believed strongly in second chances. She saw inmates as people shaped by mistakes, not defined by them. She took her role seriously, spending extra hours reviewing reports and ensuring procedures were followed correctly. She trusted the prison administration and believed the system, while flawed, still worked toward fairness. That belief would later be tested in ways she never expected. Ethan noticed how differently she treated inmates. There was no judgment in her actions, no visible discomfort. That made him trust her in a way he had not trusted anyone in years. He followed instructions carefully, knowing that one wrong move could cost him the small responsibility he had earned. The medical office felt safer than the rest of the prison, almost detached from the cruelty outside its walls. Over time, Ethan began to understand how much information passed through that space. Dates, test results, approvals, and signatures controlled whether an inmate received treatment or waited endlessly. Everything depended on paperwork. Delays were common, and excuses were always available. Ethan believed these delays were caused by overcrowding and lack of resources. He did not yet consider the possibility of intentional neglect. Lena and the other volunteers trusted the official systems they were told to follow. Reports were stamped and filed, then forwarded for final approval. Those approvals came from higher offices, places inmates never reached. Ethan noticed that some files returned quickly while others vanished into silence. Certain names always moved faster through the system. Despite these odd patterns, Ethan felt hopeful. He believed this program meant progress. He believed that access to information meant protection. He believed that people like Lena existed to prevent injustice. That hope made him lower his guard. What Ethan did not realize was that trust inside a prison was dangerous. The system did not protect everyone equally. Some files were more valuable than lives. Somewhere above the medical wing, decisions were being made that would later destroy that fragile sense of safety. And while Ethan focused on doing his job correctly, a promise he never heard was already being broken. The change in Ethan's health did not happen overnight. At first, it was small enough to ignore. He felt tired more often, his sleep became restless, and his appetite faded. In prison, exhaustion was normal, so he convinced himself it would pass. Weeks turned into months, and the symptoms grew heavier. His body felt weaker, and simple tasks drained his energy. Requests for medical checkups were submitted. But responses came slowly, wrapped in vague explanations and delays that no one questioned. As his condition worsened, Ethan began to sense that something was wrong beyond ordinary illness. The medical wing, once a place of cautious hope, now felt distant and unresponsive. Test appointments were rescheduled without explanation. Results were said to be pending longer than usual. He noticed that his name no longer moved through the system the way it once had. It was as if his file had been placed on pause. One afternoon, while assisting with record organization, Ethan noticed a discrepancy. A date in a medical log did not match the timeline he remembered. A test result appeared older than it should have been. Curious but careful, he traced the reference code to a secondary archive. What he found made his hands shake. The test confirming his HIV-positive status had been completed months earlier. The result had been signed off and stamped. It had never been delivered to him. The realization hit him with crushing force. This was not a mistake. The delay was intentional. The paperwork showed approval chains leading upward, far beyond the medical staff. The final authorization bore the warden's office seal. The knowledge spread through Ethan's mind like poison. He had been living with a life-changing condition, without treatment, without warning, and without choice. Shock quickly turned into anger. He replayed every moment he had trusted the system, every request he had filed, every quiet hour he had spent believing help was coming. His health had deteriorated while someone decided silence was easier than responsibility. The prison did not just fail him, it sacrificed him. Ethan began noticing patterns he had once ignored. Other inmates with similar conditions had vanished into isolation or transferred suddenly. Medical complaints disappeared. Names were removed from lists. The system did not erase people loudly. It erased them quietly through paperwork and delay. Physically, his body continued to weaken. Mentally, something hardened inside him. Fear turned into clarity. He understood now that survival did not depend on honesty or patience. It depended on awareness and control. The betrayal was deeper than illness. It was the realization that the people trusted to protect life had chosen reputation over humanity. Ethan returned the file exactly where he found it, leaving no trace of discovery. He said nothing. He showed nothing. Inside, however, the man who once believed in rules was gone. In his place stood someone who understood that truth alone was dangerous. and that knowledge, once gained, could never be taken back. Lena Brooks had always been careful, but Ethan's condition began to draw her attention in ways she hadn't expected. She noticed the subtle changes first, the lingering fatigue in his movements, the pale skin that seemed to carry more weight than the prison walls could bear, the quiet moments when his eyes drifted toward nothing. Volunteers often saw inmates only in passing, focused on forms and schedules. Lena, however, had a way of noticing details that others overlooked. Something about Ethan's decline did not fit the usual pattern of prison illness. She began reviewing old medical files quietly during her free hours, comparing dates, test results, and approvals. Patterns emerged slowly at first: missing signatures, delayed treatments, repeated rescheduling. At first, she thought it might be simple bureaucracy or error, the kind that happened in any large institution. But as she dug deeper, the irregularities became impossible to ignore. Some test results had never been delivered to patients. Others had been marked complete before they were even conducted. The files seemed to tell a story that no one in the prison wanted to acknowledge. Lena understood the danger of her discovery. In a place like this, exposing wrongdoing could make enemies, even among the staff who seemed trustworthy. She did not confront anyone directly. She did not accuse the warden or the guards. Instead, she began creating her own records, quietly documenting every anomaly, every missing date, every falsified signature. Each piece of evidence was carefully stored in a separate location, invisible to the casual observer. Despite the risks, Lena felt compelled to act. She could not ignore what was happening to Ethan or to the other inmates who suffered in silence. Her conscience would not allow her to turn away. She became a silent investigator, moving through the prison with her work hidden in plain sight. Every form she touched, every file she reviewed, added another piece to the puzzle. She saw the faces of those who had been neglected, men and women whose health had been sacrificed for convenience and reputation. Ethan noticed the subtle change in her attention but did not question it. He remained cautious, wary of anyone who seemed too kind. In prison, trust could be dangerous, and even volunteers could carry hidden motives. But he could not ignore the sense of purpose in Lena's actions, the careful diligence with which she examined every document. He realized that she was different from the others, someone who genuinely cared, someone who might see the truth when no one else would. As Lena collected evidence, she became increasingly aware of the scale of the betrayal. It was not limited to a single inmate or a single incident. The warden's office had been suppressing information for years, manipulating records to protect the institution's image rather than the people it was supposed to serve. The realization shook her. This was not a matter of negligence. It was deliberate, calculated, and systematic. Lena's quiet investigation transformed her role in the prison. She was no longer just a volunteer helping with health programs. She had become the keeper of dangerous knowledge, a witness to betrayal on a scale she had never imagined. And in that silence, she understood that the truth she now held could change everything if it survived long enough to be revealed. Ethan's anger did not burst outward. It grew quietly, methodically, like a fire smoldering under dry wood. He understood that in prison, raw rage was useless. Outbursts led to isolation, punishment, or worse. Strength came not from fists, but from knowledge, patience, and observation. Every day, as he lay in his cell at night, he pieced together the patterns of the prison, the way favors moved through guards, how alliances formed among inmates, and how influence could flow without direct action. He realized that power was not limited to those with keys or weapons. It could exist invisibly, quietly, and it could be wielded by anyone who understood its rules. Ethan spent weeks studying everything around him. He memorized guard schedules, noting who could be persuaded or intimidated. He observed which inmates had indirect influence over cell block operations, how whispers could become action, and how loyalty could be traded. No one suspected him, not even the warden, whose confidence in Ethan's compliance blinded him to the storm forming just a few cells away. The warden assumed fear kept control, but Ethan had learned that fear could be a weapon if wielded subtly. Physical confrontation was never part of his plan. He did not need it. The prison was a system of interlocking weaknesses, and he intended to exploit them. He began communicating indirectly with inmates who had connections beyond their cells, those whose loyalty could be guided without suspicion. Small favors were exchanged quietly. Information was shared carefully, always as a question or an observation, never as a direct command. Over time, he built a network that could act without leaving traces leading back to him. The irony of the situation was not lost on Ethan. The warden, who believed himself untouchable, had created the conditions for his own vulnerability. By suppressing information, manipulating medical records, and treating inmates as statistics rather than people, he had allowed Ethan to learn the system's hidden pathways. Knowledge became a weapon sharper than any blade, and patience became a shield stronger than any lock. Ethan's mind worked relentlessly, calculating the smallest probabilities, testing scenarios in his head. He imagined outcomes, predicted reactions, and refined strategies. Every decision he made was invisible to the guards and warden alike, yet it carried consequences that could ripple outward. While others slept or complained about boredom, Ethan prepared in silence. He was careful not to show frustration or impatience. To the world outside his cell, he remained the quiet, compliant inmate. No one suspected that beneath the calm surface, a plan was forming, a plan fueled by betrayal, sickness, and the realization that justice could be created from knowledge and precision rather than violence. By the time Ethan had completed this mental network, he understood that he had moved beyond victimhood. He had become something else, a force operating entirely within the prison's invisible currents. The warden's arrogance had given him the map. The prison itself had provided the tools. And when the time came, Ethan knew he could use them in ways no one could trace, in ways that would expose betrayal while keeping his hands seemingly clean. Ethan understood that to act effectively, he could not rely on direct confrontation. The prison walls were too thick, the surveillance too constant, and any mistake could end his life. Instead, he relied on subtlety, timing, and knowledge of human behavior. Outside the prison, the warden's enemies already existed, though he had never met most of them. Corruption, abuse of authority, and secret financial dealings had created resentment that spread quietly beyond the walls. Ethan realized that influence extended far beyond the prison gates, into offices, newspapers, and even political circles. His plan would not require him to leave his cell. It would require him to direct the currents without leaving a trace. He began by observing patterns of communication among inmates, staff, and outside contacts. Letters, legal appeals, and phone calls all carried more than words. They carried influence and potential leverage. Ethan made mental notes of who had access to what information, who was trusted, and who was desperate. In a place like this, desperation could be guided, and trust could be manipulated. He understood that the prison system itself could be a tool if he knew how to pull the right strings. Ethan avoided making direct requests or commands. Instead, he planted small hints, phrased carefully, in the right documents or conversations. He allowed the right people to discover these hints naturally, creating a sense that the knowledge was their own. Slowly, invisible threads began connecting people outside his cell to the warden's vulnerabilities. Every step was calculated to look like coincidence or chance, while in reality, it was guided entirely by him. The genius of his plan was its invisibility. Nothing was written in code, nothing was spoken aloud. Yet, through careful observation and strategic nudges, Ethan created a ripple effect. Misplaced files, minor leaks to journalists, legal inquiries, all seemed unrelated to outsiders, but were carefully orchestrated outcomes of his silent influence. The warden, confident in his control, remained unaware that every misstep he encountered was connected, indirectly, to the inmate he had dismissed as harmless. Ethan also understood timing. The warden had cultivated a public image of infallibility, and public perception mattered more to him than anything else. Ethan waited for the right moments when pressure from external scrutiny could amplify the effect of each small nudge. By the time patterns began to emerge in the outside world, the warden's actions were already constrained. Decisions he made to protect his reputation only tightened the net around him. In this quiet orchestration, Ethan felt a strange sense of power. He was still confined, still vulnerable physically, but intellectually he was beyond the warden's reach. Every move the administration made to cover mistakes played directly into his carefully prepared framework. Every oversight, every delay, every attempt to hide corruption became a part of his plan, without his needing to act directly. By the end of the period he had set, Ethan had achieved what most inmates could only dream of: influence without exposure. The warden remained oblivious to the forces closing in, convinced that control still lay in his hands. But behind the walls, in shadows and whispers, a network guided by Ethan was already in motion, moving toward a conclusion that would be as surprising as it was inevitable. In the world of prisons, power rarely comes from freedom. For Ethan, it had come from understanding. The news broke quietly at first, filtered through staff whispers and rumors among inmates. Warden Marcus Hale had been found dead under suspicious circumstances, and the prison went into immediate lockdown. Guards moved like shadows, checking every corner, locking every door, while investigators arrived to examine the scene. From the outside, the story seemed sudden, shocking, and brutal. Within the prison, the tension was almost unbearable. Inmates whispered, theories spread like wildfire, but no one knew the truth, or so it seemed. The initial reports were cautious. Authorities described the warden's death as mysterious, possibly linked to external threats. They emphasized that it was an isolated incident, unrelated to prison operations. The press seized on the story, highlighting the fall of a man once considered untouchable. Headlines painted him as a figure whose control had crumbled in a single night. Yet behind the headlines, the truth was far more complex, hidden beneath layers of careful planning, invisible influence, and long-simmering resentment. Ethan observed the chaos from his cell. He did not celebrate, nor did he panic. He had anticipated this moment with meticulous patience. He watched as the prison scrambled to maintain order, noting how fear and confusion spread even among those tasked with enforcing control. Every guard's reaction, every inquiry, every misstep by the administrative staff confirmed how fragile the warden's authority had really been. To Ethan, the death was not the climax. It was the confirmation of something he had already set in motion. Meanwhile, Lena Brooks had submitted evidence anonymously, careful not to reveal her identity. The documents she provided corroborated the irregularities in medical treatment, delayed test results, and suppressed records. Her submissions sparked a federal investigation that extended far beyond the prison walls. Investigators began reopening cases, reviewing years of internal communications, and cross-checking files with external records. What emerged painted a picture of deliberate negligence and corruption, implicating powerful individuals who had relied on the warden's reputation to shield their actions. The combination of Ethan's subtle orchestration and Lena's evidence created an unstoppable chain reaction. The system that the warden had manipulated to maintain his image was now collapsing from within. Allies turned cautious, subordinates hesitated, and the public narrative began to unravel. Every step that had once seemed like protection now appeared as evidence of guilt. The warden's death, though sudden, was only the first visible crack in a structure long weakened by secrecy and betrayal. Inside the prison, life did not pause. Inmates reacted in disbelief, guards in fear, and administrators in panic. Ethan remained composed, observing the outcomes of actions he had influenced months earlier. He understood that real power often worked quietly, invisible to the eyes of those who believed themselves in control. The death of Marcus Hale became a symbol, a moment when hidden truths finally surfaced, exposing the corruption that had been meticulously concealed for years. By the time the national media had fully reported on the story, the prison had become a case study in systemic failure, abuse of authority, and the consequences of betrayal. Ethan's careful strategy had achieved its purpose. The warden's death shocked the nation, but it was only one part of the exposure that followed. The truth, once hidden, could no longer be ignored, and the people responsible for years of manipulation were finally being held accountable. In that moment, the quiet inmate who had once been overlooked became the unseen force behind a reckoning that would resonate far beyond the prison walls. Ethan remained in his cell long after the chaos had begun to settle. The prison continued its routines, but everything had changed beneath the surface. Guards were tense, administrators whispered cautiously in corridors, and inmates speculated endlessly about what had caused the warden's sudden death. The world outside had taken notice, yet no one could trace the events back to him. Ethan's hands remained clean, his presence unnoticed, but he carried a profound sense of accomplishment. He had transformed from a victim of betrayal into an invisible architect of justice. The federal investigation, fueled in part by Lena's anonymous submissions, widened rapidly. Officials discovered irregularities spanning years, medical records altered, treatments delayed, and documents manipulated to protect reputations rather than serve the inmates' well-being. The warden's office, once untouchable, became a symbol of systemic corruption. Investigators revealed financial improprieties, unreported medical negligence, and a chain of cover-ups that implicated multiple layers of the prison administration. Every revelation shocked the public and discredited the leadership that had been long trusted. Lena Brooks became a silent hero in the unfolding story. Though her identity remained protected for her safety, the evidence she provided was instrumental in exposing the scale of the betrayal. Her careful documentation allowed authorities to connect missing files, delayed treatments, and falsified reports directly to the office of the late warden. Her role proved that truth often relies on courage, persistence, and quiet action rather than loud confrontation. She had risked everything, and her efforts were reshaping the way the prison system would be monitored and held accountable for decades to come. Ethan's own story, however, was far more complicated. He remained incarcerated, his sentence untouched. There was no direct evidence linking him to the warden's death. Legally, he was a model inmate, obedient, quiet, and compliant. Yet the knowledge of what he had achieved gave him a profound sense of power. He had orchestrated a reckoning from within the confines of a cell, using intelligence, patience, and observation as weapons. The prison had tried to take everything from him, including his health, but he had taken control in return, exposing the corruption that had harmed countless lives. The prison administration underwent sweeping changes. Policies regarding inmate healthcare were rewritten, oversight committees were strengthened, and medical transparency became a legal requirement. Investigations forced officials to acknowledge past failures publicly, creating reforms that could prevent the same abuses from recurring. Ethan watched these developments quietly, understanding that while he remained imprisoned, his actions had created a lasting impact far beyond the prison walls. In the months that followed, the story of the betrayed inmate and the fallen warden became widely known. Journalists highlighted the injustice, the calculated betrayal, and the silent strategies that led to exposure. Yet Ethan's name remained largely hidden. He had chosen invisibility, knowing that fame or recognition could undo everything he had carefully orchestrated. The satisfaction came not from acknowledgement, but from the knowledge that truth had triumphed, and the system had been forced to confront its failures. Ethan's life had been forever altered by betrayal, illness, and confinement. Yet in that confinement, he had found a form of justice that no cell could contain. The warden's death, the exposure of corruption, and the reforms that followed were reminders that power is not always visible, and control does not always belong to those who appear to hold it. Sometimes, the quietest people, hidden behind walls and silence, can be the ones who change everything. And in that silent transformation, Ethan finally reclaimed a piece of himself, proving that even in captivity, justice could be commanded without freedom, and truth could be wielded without hands.